Hey everyone, welcome to this beginner's guide on drifting in Forza Horizon 5. We're going to first cover building drift cars, touching on the differences between low power and tandem builds, and high power, high drift score builds. Then we'll take a car out and teach some drifting technique, so you can start 3-starring those drift zones with ease. If you're still having trouble though, we're going to close with a troubleshooting section, so you can hopefully dial in on where you're having problems and learn what you need to practice on or what you can change in your build. I've made timestamps for this video, so if you're only interested in some sections here, feel free to skip around to where you want. Let's start with building out our drift car. And I'm not going to go too deep into the finer points here, as so much of drifting comes down to personal preference and style, instead of min-maxing and fine-tuning the perfect build. Expect this to move a lot quicker than my standard guides. First, we start with car selection. Drifting, at a minimum, really only needs one thing: rear-wheel drive. It helps to go with something lightweight and front-engined too. Drifting in Horizon is a lot more about the build and the tune than it is about the specific car choice. You can really get anything to slide with the right setup. But that being said, of course, some chassis are better than others. So since we're going for a more real grassroots build style to start, a 90s Japanese classic is the favored choice. I'm going to rock this FC RX-7 today, but you can't go wrong with any S chassis either. For high power builds, the Formula Drift cars often have incredible steering angle and tons of power, and honestly are really easy choices for getting high drift zone scores and some easy 3-stars. But you will have a tough time starting out your drifting journey in one of these cars. So, back with our FC. Outside of Horizon Open, drift cars don't really need to fit into any class spec, so you're generally free to build exactly to your goals. Start with aero and wheels. Drifting is a style game after all. Then you will want all the drift parts: drift suspension, the drift differential, and drift tires. You may see some exceptions to the rule on the drift tires. On some low power builds, stock or street might be what you need, but in most cases, I've found drift tires to be the ultimate easy choice for any of my own builds. Next up, make sure you take race brakes for your tandem builds especially, as brake tuning is key for good tandems. For transmissions, you won't really need the higher gears. Stock, sport, or race 6-speed will be fine for whatever your goals are. Then, just build to your heart's content. But let's talk power. If you're going for score, the more power, the better. Just make sure you add grip to accommodate. A more realistic build, and most tandem builds, should sit somewhere between 350 to 500 horsepower. And keep in mind, for real-life comparison, that's still a lot. My first real drift day was in a single-cam KA240 that barely made 150 horsepower, and I still had a blast and linked the whole course. But Horizon's roads and corners are much bigger and wider than any real popular drift track, so you can allow yourself the bump in power. Especially if you're a beginner though, make sure you stay within and probably on the low end of that 350 to 500 range to start. Too much power is going to be too hard to control and you'll pick up some bad habits. Aside from power, one of the other majorly important parts of your drift builds is going to be tire width. Wide front tires are good. They let you maintain front tire grip, which is important in drifting. Rear tire width is key though, and will probably need some fine tuning. More power needs wider tires, but too wide on too little power, and you won't be able to maintain revs and wheel speed. Tires too thin though, and you'll just be bouncing off your limiter, maxing your wheel speed, and not getting anywhere. It's very important to understand that, although it may not seem like it, drifting is all about grip. And often, especially on high power builds, you're going to be doing everything you can to maximize grip to those rear tires. Start by finding a good tire width that works for your power level, then you can fine-tune grip in the tuning window. And with that, your base build is done. Let's head into tuning. You can run your differential more like a welded diff or more like an LSD. A welded diff would be fully locked on accel and decel and will slide really easily and consistently. Common LSD values will run around 85 to 95% accel lock, and a much lower decel in most cases, between 0 to 40% or so. I typically run with 100% lock on really all of my builds, but this is a bit of a personal preference. Now for brake tuning. This is key for tandems as you need to be able to slow the car without straightening. Move all your braking bias to the front wheels, which, because Forza's backwards, means towards rear. Then drop your pressure to about 30%. This is going to allow you to hit the brakes if you're getting too close to your lead driver without losing the drift and straightening. Aero tuning isn't going to play much of a role here if you even have it unlocked, but high front downforce can be nice to help the front end. For your damping, stock rebound is often plenty good, but you should definitely drop your bump stiffness to about 50% of your rebound. This will help the tires stay on the road during a drift. For springs, stiffness plays a big role in your grip. Try not to adjust front too much, but lower rear can give you more grip on your back tires. For ride height, well, lifting a drift car is sacrilege, so leave this at minimum. Your ARBs will affect things similarly to how your spring rate did. Try not to adjust front too much, but a low rear ARB will deliver a lot of rear grip and can help a ton in power builds. And more stiffness in the rear can help you break out your rear end much easier on lower power. Now, onto one of the more important windows for drifting, alignment. You generally want as much front negative camber as possible in most setups. This means -5 degrees, which is where it should already be at, as well as maximum caster, 7 degrees. This is going to give you more angle and grip while countersteering. For rear camber, there's going to be a sweet spot of peak grip depending on the car, usually around 1 to 1.5 degrees negative, but if you want less rear grip, you can run more negative camber. Try not to decrease rear camber too much, as this will have some negative effects on your car's handling. Next up, front toe. Front toe out gives you more effective steering angle, as well as destabilizing your front tires, making it easier to throw more weight on entries. Run as much as you're comfortable with. I like to sit around 2 degrees on more realistic builds, but we'll bump it up to 5 if I'm trying to set high drift zone scores on high power builds. Your rear toe is a great place to adjust how the rear of the car will behave in a corner. More toe out will encourage a much wider corner trajectory and give you more drift angle. In a way, it makes the car crab walk a bit. More toe in will make your drifting feel tighter and more controlled. For beginners, run rear toe in. It'll help you a ton. Then, as you get more comfortable, start pushing towards rear toe out. Now for gearing, a low power, more realistic build shouldn't touch this much, but making some admittedly goofy adjustments to gearing can be a huge help in tandems and high power builds. For this, you first want to find a good gear or pair of gears that you can drift in. These are often 3rd or 4th on a mid-power build. If you're banging on the rev limiter and not maintaining speed, you're drifting in too low of a gear, and if you can't stay high in your rev range and keep bogging down, you gotta downshift. Once you've found the gear or gears that drift best, move all of your higher gears much tighter in to that lowest good drifting gear. You want your graph to look something like this. What this lets you do is modulate your drift much easier because you can up and downshift mid-drift for that bit of extra wheel speed or to tuck into a tighter corner without worrying about bogging down and losing the drift. Finally, let's talk tires. Front tires should stay around 30 psi, but you can lower pressure here to get a bit more of a 4-wheel drift effect and some bigger entries. Rear pressure is where you're going to fine-tune your rear grip. Lower pressures are grippier and smoother. Higher pressure will break loose more suddenly and not have as much drift grip. In general, you should always be running a stock or lower rear tire pressure, lower on high power cars. If you have to increase pressure much over stock to stay in a drift, chances are you just need a stiffer rear end, thinner tires, or more power. And that's really it for your build. Horizon 5's addition of even more drift-specific parts means you can kind of just pick any front-engined rear-wheel drive car, slap all the drift parts on it, and upgrade it to whatever your power and style goals are, and then just hit the ground running. Or maybe hit the road drifting? Before we talk technique, let's cover some important settings you need to be running for proper drifting. To start, make sure stability and especially traction control are both off. Then you should be running at least on a manual clutchless transmission. Manual with clutch will give you the added benefit of being able to clutch kick, but it's not a must for beginners. Drifting in auto is extremely difficult, and if you haven't learned manual clutchless yet, now is probably the time. You can keep steering on normal, and for beginners I recommend it. Same goes for ABS. Alright, let's get on the road. I find a good place to practice is right here at the main festival's drift zone. A drift consists of 4 major parts: the line, the entry, the drift, and the exit or transition. We're going to start with handbrake entries. This is a great beginner's crutch, if you will. Handbrake entries are easy, but you'll want to learn to not use your handbrake quite so much once you get more comfortable with drifting. So, get yourself headed down the straight, turn into the corner, and hold down the handbrake at the same time, then keep the handbrake held, and countersteer as soon as you notice the car's weight shifting into the corner. Do not touch the gas yet. Just modulate the handbrake and countersteer to keep yourself moving around the corner until you come to a stop. Try to keep your car pointed towards the corner's exit throughout this entire practice. If you come to a stop and you're in line with the bridge, chances are you probably did a good job. But if you keep spinning out, you're probably countersteering too late or not enough. More handbrake will push you further to the outside of the corner, so if you're coming in with too much speed or too far outside, try letting off the handbrake. Once you can do this in a controlled manner without spinning, then start adding power, but only add power when you need to. Let yourself slow down, scrub some speed, and slide for a second. Then add power when it's time to increase speed again and push yourself around the corner. If, when adding power, you just bang off the limiter and lose the drift, you gotta be in a higher gear. And if you bog down and lose the drift, a lower gear. Countersteering, which means turning the wheels in the opposite direction of the corner, can be frustrating to learn because I feel there's no good way to teach it. It really all just comes down to timing and practice. You'll start to understand what the car is going to do and how much angle you'll have when you initiate your drift, and then you'll start to learn how much countersteer you need to apply, and you do it almost preemptively. One of the biggest mistakes I see beginners make is countersteering too late, when the car is already too far into a spin to correct. Don't be frustrated if it takes you a few tries, but once you've got that figured, well, there you go, you've got a drift. When coming out of your drift to either straighten back out or transition into another corner, be mindful of your throttle. Letting off too abruptly can grip you up and snap your car's weight around, causing you to spin out. Try to let off the gas slowly or feather the throttle when transitioning to help the car's weight shift more smoothly. Practice on one corner over and over until you can nail it almost every time. Learn what speed and at what angle you need to get a good entry, find when you need to add power, when to countersteer, and how to follow a good line around the turn. Then, take your skill to another area of the map and try to link multiple corners. Once you can do that well enough, you should start weight shifting your entries instead of handbraking. But keep in mind that the handbrake can be a useful tool both during entries and in the middle of your drift. One of the best pieces of advice I feel I can give for maintaining a good drift is to remember that most of your steering isn't done with the steering wheel. It's done with your gas pedal. More gas will increase speed and potential angle and push you further to the outside of the corner. Foot braking can slow you down and pull you to the inside of a corner while scrubbing wheel speed. Your handbrake can lock up the wheels easily and extend a drift if needed. There are many different techniques to utilize while drifting, and everyone is going to have a bit of a different style and lean on certain techniques more. If you're still struggling to get your car around the corner though, here are some troubleshooting tips. For one, almost every issue can be solved with better countersteering. It really is the glue that holds drifting together, and it's something that's sadly so difficult to teach. You just have to feel it. On controller and keyboard, you're going to be tapping the steering quite a bit. Look at my driver's hands on the inside of the car while drifting, and you can see that there's a lot of tapping to countersteer, then letting it recenter a bit, because I play on an Xbox controller. This isn't the case in real life or in-game with a steering wheel though. If you play on a wheel, the countersteer will be much smoother. You'll always be countersteering to some degree, just making minor adjustments as you drift around the corner. You will also notice that I feather the throttle a lot. Drifting is not about just getting sideways and mashing the throttle all the way through. Remember, you steer with your gas pedal. To start, only use throttle if you need more angle or speed. Otherwise, just let the car slide. 90% of problems with drifting can be solved with better throttle control and countersteer. That being said, a better build will absolutely help. And the two biggest issues you will have with drift builds is too much grip or too little. If you're a beginner that keeps spinning out, definitely try adding more grip until you get comfortable, then taking some away. To summarize things mentioned throughout this video, if you need more grip, lower rear bump stiffness, rear spring stiffness, rear ARBs, and rear tire pressure. You can also decrease accel or decel diff lock. If you need less grip, again, modify the rear, but just stiffen and increase everything that I just told you to decrease. For tandems, it can often be helpful to promote less grip so you don't accidentally grip up in a chase run and lose the drift or hit your lead driver. The key is to practice. No mod is more valuable than seat time. Drifting does take patience. There's no simple button combo to press. It's a dynamic skill that needs time to master, but you'll get there. And I hope I've helped you get there just a little bit faster. Don't forget to try out different cars, builds, and techniques to find the combination you like, because it's all about finding your own style. There's not just one way around a corner when it comes to drifting. Thanks for watching, keep drifting fun, and I'll see you in the next video.